Rajiv, what a pleasure to have you in the Branson Center's podcast. Thank you so much for your time. I am curious and excited to be in conversation with you because you exist in a world that intimidates me and yet I think is quite exciting, even though I'm scared of it, which is the world of investment. And so thank you for your time. Hello.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. I'm a massive fan of the work that you and your team are doing, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you, and thank you for your time as always. And so before we get into this world, and I think what was interesting is we were talking behind the scenes around sentiment and, the fickleness of certain environments that you work in. And I don't want to go too much into that conversation, but where we were landing, I think, was this idea is that this world that you exist in is made up of human beings. And so who is Rajiv, the human being, before I start going into Rajiv's day job and hopefully what insights we can gain from what you do on a day-to-day basis?
Yes, it's a fantastic question, and I often find myself thinking about that. I am a product of my environment, and I don't ever forget that. So first and foremost, I acknowledge that I'm a product of my both indirect and direct environment. And more than that, I think I'm a massive cricket fan.
Okay.
And I use this analogy.
I like cricket too, by the way.
Really?
Yes.
Fantastic.
Yes.
Maybe we can keep the analogy going through the
Oh,
conversation.
we're on a good wicket.
Oh, love it.
Yes.
Love it. Okay. So I use this analogy of a batsman getting dropped on a very low score, and all of a sudden something clicks psychologically where you say, well, I was never even meant to be here anyway going forward because I was dropped. So I got a second chance and I'm going to make the most of it. And more often than not, that batsman plays with more freedom, and it's a very liberating feeling. So who I am is someone who's realized that I've been exposed to fantastic opportunities. I've gotten to experience amazing things that this world has to offer. And I am a person who is trying to create opportunities like that for people around me and trying to absorb as much of that as I can going forward. So I want to have as many lives as I can within this life. And whatever that means personally, professionally, I'm just here to absorb and appreciate the world around me.
Well, when you introduce yourself like that, then I have to ask you immediately, what is your purpose?
What is my purpose? Okay. Well, it's really related to what I was just saying. So, the Gates Foundation has this report called the Goalkeepers Award. It's a report. And what they do is they track the sort of the disparity that exists in the world. And I read this recently where they looked at the example of a Nigerian child relative to someone born in another part of the world. And what they say is if you happen to be born in Nigeria, there's your level of productivity is immediately 1/3 of what it could be, just given the circumstances that you face. What's also interesting there is they say no matter where you're born in the world, if you're a woman, you are immediately on the back foot and you're exposed to multiple hardships and difficulties, etc. In parallel, there's a book that I read a couple of years ago called Utopia for Realists. And the sentiment was largely the same, where the author looks at the value of a passport, the circumstances into which you are born as a human being, and how that drives such a huge part of where you ultimately end up. It's incredible. My purpose is acknowledging that I am a massive fan and a big proponent of people outliving their expectations or their circumstances on paper. So I'm born into a certain environment, into a set of circumstance. To what extent am I able to exceed those expectations and by what margin? So I feel like I've done okay in achieving that for myself. And my purpose is to contribute to a world in which I'm seeing more and more people exceed their theoretical expectation or set of circumstance and increasing those margins.
That's incredible. I think it brings up the often said line of, can you be your ancestors' wildest dream?
Yes.
You know?
Yes.
So I really like that. And I think then that takes us quite nicely in terms of then what it is that you do on a day-to-day basis in terms of how you earn your living, because I think that aligns quite nicely with your purpose, how you introduce yourself. So you're a man who's in alignment. So let's say that you're bowling on a straight line.
Straight wicket, yes.
Keep it. No? Okay, well,
Yes.
we're keeping our analogy going.
Okay.
We're going to try.
I love it.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit more about your day-to-day job, what it is that you do, and your organization.
Sure. So I'm part of Founders Factory Africa. Founders Factory Africa is part of a broader, more global Founders Factory family. The ethos behind the organization, whichever part of the world we're referencing, and we're operational in the US, in the UK, Europe, and across Africa. The ethos behind the organization is largely related to what we were saying, which is talent is generally spread equally across any region, any part of the world that you look at. Access to resources,
Not so much.
not so much. What we're trying to do is even those playing fields. So what we've done is we've created as a brand, as a global brand, we've created an organization that not only provides capital, which everyone requires, but we have groups of operators across the world who roll up their sleeves on a day-to-day basis and who work with tech founders. So in our case, for Founders Factory Africa, across the African continent, across an array of disciplines. And we provide hands-on operational support through an incubation and an acceleration program. And we help grow businesses. So we focus specifically in fintech, health tech, and agri-tech. And so we're an investor, we're an incubator, we're an accelerator. But more than anything, we think of ourselves as an API, or the lubricant that fuels people and an ecosystem around us.
And I think what drew me and even us as Team Branson Center when we were looking at Founders Factory Africa as an entity was that it really aligned with our understanding of what is it that entrepreneurs need to be enabled. And, our philosophy is that entrepreneurs need access to network, market, and capital at the same time, so that those opportunities can land in a team and that team can be enabled. And sometimes it's finding the balance between those three things. And so for entrepreneurs to be able to access the kind of offering that you have at Founders Factory Africa in a way that then brings in that balance, it really is a way of getting to a point where entrepreneurs are meaningfully enabled. And so a question I have that may not be very fair, but I will ask it anyway because I think our audience starting to pick up on a trend, which is why the focus on tech founders in terms of health tech, agri-tech, and fintech when there are many other types of businesses? What's your take on technology and why this big focus from many, many entities on founders who are looking at tech entities?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. And I don't think it's one that gets discussed enough. So very happy to spend some time on that because I've been pretty vocal about this. There's this narrative over the last couple of years where we talk about access to capital and a shortage. And, the way I look at, for example, in South Africa, the structural unemployment issue that we have. Yes, unemployment is high, but when you unpack that one level further, there's the structural unemployment issue, which is not necessarily simply just demand versus supply, but matching skill sets with the right jobs. And I take that and I draw a parallel between the types of capital. So what we find sometimes is that there actually is capital available for different, traditional types of business models versus tech. But what you have is this, because of the increasing narrative of tech and startups over the last couple of years, people with really, really good cash generative models are going to venture capital funds or people who have a specific mandate for technology and asking for funding, don't get that. And there's this misconception that it's a bad model, but it's actually not. It's just the wrong source of capital. So a lot of what we need to be spending time doing as a market is distinguishing between the types of business models and the types of capital that are relevant for those business models. Why we focus specifically on technology, and I think like many others, is it's dependent on your source of funding. So we've been given funding by a group of corporates who are really looking to push the needle as far as innovation is concerned. So corporate innovation. And these are organizations that have been in existence for decades, centuries even, and they understand the significance of being at the forefront of technology and using that to drive innovation within their sectors. So it's, if we were looking purely from a return standpoint and we were saying, well, there are businesses in South Africa or in Nigeria or in Zimbabwe or wherever, there's probably a much larger, or there is a much larger percentage of businesses that are going to be a lot more cash generative and sustainable and will probably do well. But what we're doing is we are looking at what's on the forefront of innovation, and that, just given where we are in the world and the role of technology, we feel that has to be technology enabled. And I think the big theme that drives why technology for us is when we look at what we need as a continent going forward to drive sustainable economic growth, it's the future of work. And, personally for me, and I know this is shared by many of my colleagues as well, I look at the overpopulation crisis that we have on the continent, and I look at that increasing gap between population growth and job growth.
Right.
And the ability to create a generation of the future that is going to find work using technology, because that's where we're headed, is super important. So even if we're not backing a business model directly today that is a tech startup, but we're creating a culture that enables people to have jobs of the future, that's also equally important.
It wasn't that funny after all. And so what is exciting me in terms of what you're describing and why, you as Founders Factory have made this decision to focus on tech is that you're talking about businesses that are tech-enabled and not tech for the sake of tech. And I think there is something to be said for the idea that you're also focusing on these three pillars of fintech, agri-tech, and health tech that are solving real-life, everyday, global challenges where we're talking about impact. And so I'd be interested to understand what and at which point do you place emphasis when looking at businesses that are tech-enabled? At what point do you place emphasis on the purpose that these businesses bring into the conversation?
From the first second. If it's not immediately and abundantly clear what problem is being solved, it's very difficult to get fully behind a business model that is going to be sustainable and scalable. And I think we've seen, by virtue of the volume of opportunities that we've been fortunate to have been involved with, but also screened, over time, you realize that there are people who are creating solutions and then going out and finding problems to solve. And there are those who find a problem, are deeply connected to the problem, and figure out a solution that is going to be sustainable, but it has to start with solving a problem. So I'm not sure if that answers, but the purpose there, if you are solving a problem for a group of people, it's very difficult to question the purpose or the intent when that as a foundation is clear. How we end up working on solutions and whether there's a lot of technology involved, whether it's not, whether you scale to different countries, those are all secondary.
Right. It's also interesting because it reminds me of Richard Branson, Sir Richard Branson. Wow, got that right third time, right? Lucky. He often gets asked, what is an entrepreneur? And he's so clear around that, which is an entrepreneur is somebody who can make other people's lives better. and so it comes down to this idea of solving for people's challenges and being deeply connected to that. So I like that that's where you start as well. So then it takes me to this conversation around you're sitting in a position where you are looking at a myriad of businesses. At which point do you say, this is a business that is ready to receive some form of investment, whether it's from us or from our counterparts in the market?
It's an interesting one because of my job, I often find myself talking about investment readiness. And I try to make it relatable. So bear with me. I'm going to go back and use another analogy.
We're going to use cricket.
We're not going to use cricket.
Okay, we're moving on. Okay.
Let's talk about life and dating.
Oh, saucy.
Okay.
Yes, let's go.
So a misconception, and I think something that holds founders back a lot of the time, is looking at this concept of investment readiness as an end state or a milestone. I need to tick 100 boxes and then I'm investment ready.
Right.
And in order to try and make it a bit more relatable, I go, okay, imagine you are on a date because, being or getting into bed with an investor, I mean, that's a partnership. It's a relationship. And so I think there's a lot of parallels between that and a personal relationship. And I say, imagine there are two types of people you're sitting across a dinner table from and you're on a date. The first person...
You're on a date with both of them?
Well, let's say two separate nights.
Two separate dates. Okay,
yes, two separate dates.
Yeah.
So date one, and they both have three specific characteristics. The first person tells you, I'm amazing, my career is amazing, I do all of these amazing things, and my family is amazing, whatnot. The second characteristic is they constantly talk about how amazing their life is, and you're like, okay, cool, what about me? And then the third is, if the date goes well, and you want to take that to the next level, and you want to hang out more, there's always this reluctance to draw back the curtains and show more, what's behind the scenes. That's the first profile.
Right.
The second profile is someone who has three characteristics. A, they are very clear about why they're sitting on the other side of that table and very open about it. B, they are very vulnerable and they have the ability and the self-awareness to say, look, these are things that are going well, but these are things that I'm still figuring out because I'm not perfect. And C is, if it does get to the next level, they're willing to say, look, this is my life, this is my apartment or whatever it is. It's not perfect, but this is who I am and what I'm about.
I want to be on that second date.
You want to be on the second date.
Yeah.
Now, here's the thing about investment readiness is that there is this tendency by founders and entrepreneurs to be the first person to portray this image of perfection. And if you're constantly going out and you have this expectation that that is what people want to see, it creates a facade and that bubble bursts very quickly.
Yeah.
So investment readiness is a state of always being ready to go on a date and being self-aware and vulnerable enough to say, this is what I'm trying to do. And you will know soon enough whether that chemistry is there because I will sit on the other side of that table and say, look, I'm not looking for perfection, but I want to know more. I want to see what's behind the curtains. I want to come see your apartment or whatever it is. And so I think, when it comes to investment readiness, it's, to me, a constant journey. Are you ever 100% ready? No, you're not. But you always want to be in a position where if that date goes well, you've laid your cards out on the table and you've prepared. And there's a certain, there's about 5 or 6 very, very basic things that we can sort of work on to provide as, I guess, signals to that person.
You're open.
Yeah.
I really, really like this analogy, and I wish you could do an infographic about it. I wish you could do a TikTok about it. I need every single entrepreneur to understand investor readiness from this point of view of its relationship building, it's partnership creation, it's the maintenance of an open exchange between investor and investee. It's a partnership, which obviously tickles my brain to no end because I'm a partnerships person. And so when does this entrepreneur who's now got to a place of, one, courageously showing up for the date, at the same time being very brave around being vulnerable, and then has continued to be curious, and at the same time maintains an openness. When does this entrepreneur get to make this decision in terms of saying, actually, I do want this investor to be a part of my life? Because I think a lot of the times we go into these conversations as entrepreneurs waiting for the investor to say, come. When can I say to myself, I want them in my life?
Yeah. Look, I think going back to the date, when you have chemistry, you know you have chemistry. When you don't have chemistry, you know you don't. In a perfect world, if you've got the chemistry, that's a good sign as a starting point. Now, the reality is that sometimes you need capital, and having chemistry and all of those sorts of things are luxuries.
Feels very nice to have.
What I often use as a benchmark is, and again, whether it's a personal or professional, but let's stick to the professional example here, or the scenario, is when you're at a point in your relationship where you're not arguing over the small things, the details. So if we're having constant discussions about legal clauses, for example, versus the purpose, things that are fundamental, then you know it's probably not the best relationship, because underpinning those details or those conversations about fine details and disagreements is ultimately a lack of trust. So what are the signals that you develop over the course of a relationship that say, well, this is built on trust. So yes, there's going to be areas that we're not going to be aligned on, but those are smaller details. And as long as you feel that you're aligned and you have a trusted relationship on the fundamental elements of what you're trying to do, and you see that the smaller details naturally iron themselves out, to me, that's a positive signal.
And what I like about this is that there is space for intuition here. There is the idea of there's the actual science in terms of understanding what is happening at this negotiation. What are the milestones? What are we trying to achieve? Are we achieving what we set out to achieve from, each person's side? But there's this angel's share of a little bit of intuition in terms of this feels adversarial. This feels like we're not being trusted. And it's okay to also let that be part of the guiding principles of, is this the right relationship or not?
So, for example, when you're in a hiring process, there's times where you're fighting over benefits or salary, and it feels transactional, versus other times or scenarios where if I know I love Nwabisa, I know I want to work with her, and those elements sort of figure themselves out, right? But it's the intent going into that interaction. And I feel like on the founder side and the investor side, you know that. So, again, coming back to this principle of if you know that the transactional nature of an interaction is minimized, to me, that's also, it's a positive signal that I look for.
Yeah. And so we'll stay on the date. What are some of the few things that I need to be clear on in understanding whether or not I should even be on a date with this investor as an entrepreneur? What do I need to understand to even know that this is the date that I'm going to come in now with the other parts of the vulnerability, the courage, and that kind of thing?
I have a lot of empathy for founders when it comes to this. And the reason I say that is because, in theory, if I'm the investor, I've got a website, and more often than not, I will say, here are the things that I look for. This is my investment criteria. If I'm a good investor, I make that very clear. The reality is that we operate in a market where there is a shortage of investable opportunities that are going to scale the way investors need it. So in as much as I may have a set of criteria on my website, which you look at and you say, wait, hold on, you do fintech or you do health tech or you do this, I fit into that, great, I should be talking to you. What tends to happen in this market is we're not at a point in the market where we advanced enough for investors to have a niche focus. And so what that means is that as an investor, I will often look at things that are not technically within my investment criteria. And there's this weird blurring of lines where sometimes you may come to me and I haven't listed your particular business model on my website, but I'm still interested in talking. And over time, the blurring of those lines means that founders say, well, my friend spoke to this person and they said that they'll look at anything as long as it's good. And so as a founder, it becomes very difficult for me to be targeted. But then on the flip side, a founder goes to an investor and they say, well, why didn't you look at my website? Because I don't do ag, for example. So it is very, very difficult. I would say in theory, if those lines were not blurred, I would say you need to be very clear around what an investment mandate is on the investor side, which should be on their website as a starting point. Or if not, if you go on LinkedIn and you look at mutual friends and you speak to someone to get some inside track.
Find out.
Exactly. It really makes a big difference. Having a look at the other thing that's absolutely necessary as a bare minimum is looking at the portfolio page of a website, or speaking to your networks and understanding what has this investor done before, so that I understand what they're interested in, the types of founders, the types of business models. And even if it doesn't lead to anything, I go into that conversation having some understanding of what they do, where they operate, and it gives me a good starting point. Going into an investor conversation completely uninformed about who they are, what they do, where they've previously invested is a recipe for disaster.
That's a good idea. Now we've figured out what, the entrepreneur needs to do to understand about the investor. What does the entrepreneur need to understand about themselves and have available to any investor at a time when they approach them to think about a partnership?
The one thing most founders can easily forget about, because you're trying to do a million things at once, is authenticity and authenticity in your messaging. So I think in threes. So I'm writing a series of short notes that's called The Power of Three.
Love it.
And one of those is the three elements. So thinking about a founder and what I would look for through an investor lens. So if you're a founder approaching an investor, what I would be expecting to see is that you have a very, very acute or deep understanding of a problem that you're looking to solve. Number two, you've credibly demonstrated that you have some superior knowledge of that space, of that sector, which is why you've decided to tackle that problem. And the third is you have created a team or a structure that is complementary. So when I look at founding teams, rather than have three of the same person, because we believe that, if I think I'm amazing and I want to find two others, rather than that, have a complementary. So where do we have gaps and what have we done to plug that? And so if you're credibly demonstrating that you've thought about all of those things to me, I'm interested as an investor. How do you communicate that? And it goes back to some of the basic materials. So, a pitch deck, you've thought about things quantitatively and qualitatively. So through your pitch deck, you've shown me why and how. Through your financial model, you've said to me, I've thought about multiple scenarios and I've mapped those out quantitatively. And even at a bare minimum, if you've done that, there's enough there for us to have a conversation around and to run a process around.
You make it sound so accessible, and it starts to take away some of that intimidation that someone like me feels when I think about an investor partnership. So grateful for this insight. And I can't wait to access your investor notes that come in threes.
I'm looking forward to writing that. Yeah, I'm very excited about it.
Oh, fantastic. And so as we wrap up, series of quick questions that hopefully will, keep us warmed up. And I don't know if I'm going to sit on the cricket analogy or the dating analogy or no analogy. Let's just keep it simple. Let's keep it simple,
Okay.
right? So
Okay.
I think 3 questions, seeing that we like threes.
Yes.
So investor readiness is?
A journey.
Purpose-led entrepreneurs should think about investment as?
A means to an end, not the end.
A good investor partnership equals?
Trust through good times and bad.
I've had an incredibly good time with you, Rajiv. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. It was fantastic. Really enjoyed the conversation and the energy and the analogies.
Oh, to more analogies.
To more. Absolutely.